Hi, everyone, viewing world. My name is Scheherazade Washington Parrish. I'm an associate with the Allied Media Project's Speakers Bureau. We are presenting for you the Virtual Love Virtual Healing Session 2 with Andrea Ritchie and Dani McClain. Today, we will be covering Black mothering, surviving and adapting during a pandemic. During this session, we will center experiences and stories of Black mothers, lifting up possible solutions for parenting, particularly for Black women and Black children in a pandemic. Allied Media Projects produces the Allied Media Conference. We also support art, media, and technology projects working for social change. The Speakers Bureau is responsible for managing and representing speakers who are a part of Allied Media Projects through their Sponsored Projects program. I would like to start this with an acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging and uplifting the history of Detroit as Anishinaabe and other indigenous peoples' stolen land, the largest majority Black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic global contributions, which was once the last stop on the Underground Railroad, known by its code name, Midnight. Detroit is also the United States city with the largest concentration of Arab Americans, a border city with historic and growing Latinx communities, and a legacy of Asian American communities and movements. So I would like to open up this conversation with Dani McClain and Andrea Ritchie. Are you there? Hey, Andrea. I don't see Dani. I can't hear you, Andrea. For the participants in the room, we have a chat room. We've got a chat box. Please feel free to engage with the speakers, with the topics. If you hear something that you like, by all means, say show enough, drop it in the chat. If you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A box and we will address those for you. So, let's start the conversation. I had an entire thing, laid out about motherhood, right? Mothers. And then the current events, these last few days in current events with George Floyd and the rioting in Minnesota and LA, and also Amy Cooper in this instance in New York, where we find these blatant weaponizing race against people. Anybody, Andrea, Dani, do you want to, let's start there. Like, how is this impacting, Dani, you as a mom, like, how does this impact you? What is your adjustment to this? How are you coping with these types of news and like releases that are happening?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you, Scheherazade, for pulling this together, and thank the AMP Speakers Bureau and everyone at home who is making time to tune into this. I'm glad to be in conversation today because this is actually, I would say, one of the ways that helps me cope is to be in contact with people and be talking through these issues with people who have an analysis that I trust and who have an analysis that helps me try to make sense of the world and know which way to move. I mean, my child is 3.5, so I think one of the challenges that I do not yet face is having to explain to her what's going on. I don't look forward to that day. It's coming very soon. But I'm still at the stage where I learned my lesson. She's very verbal. And I remember in January, February, I was driving her, I would be driving her to preschool in the morning, and I was listening to All Things Considered. I would listen to NPR while I was driving her, and that was when the news out of China was coronavirus, coronavirus, coronavirus. And she very soon started asking, you know, what is coronavirus? So I know, to be honest, at this stage, I'm limiting her access to the news because she is hearing, her ears are open, and I'm not yet prepared to have to explain to her about state violence, about a police officer kneeling on a man until he dies, on the neck of a man until he dies. I would say that the benefit of being connected to communities like AMP, to having spent years learning from Andrea, people who are looking at issues of criminalization, talking about prison abolition, talking about defunding police and moving those resources elsewhere. The benefit of having those years of connections is that when moments like this happen, I know that there is movement work in progress. I am, of course, shaken by the inhumanity and the brutality and just the disgusting nature of you know, what happens. And then to be honest, I quickly pivot to like, okay, well, who is doing this work? Who I can look to for direction? Who is doing this work that is going to offer a message in this moment that helps people who aren't already organized get organized? So that's a little bit about what I would say. You know, the Amy Cooper thing is, what I'll say about that is, you know, I just moderated a conversation that was about, it was about a lot of things, but it was largely about school desegregation. And it was a conversation between two scholars of the civil rights movement. And one of the books that I read to do that conversation was this book called Mothers of Massive Resistance. And it was about the history of white women's role in white supremacy and upholding white supremacy. And I got to be in conversation with Elizabeth Gillespie, who wrote that book, Mothers of Massive Resistance. I highly recommend it. So I had just spent, you know, weeks studying the history of the very specific ways that white women uphold white supremacy. So when the Amy Cooper news broke, it's like one more, you know, contemporary manifestation of the ways that this works. So I'll say that. I'll leave it, you know. Yeah.
There's a question, how are you speaking about this news with your children? And you've already answered that. You say your child is 3?
She's 3.5, yeah.
Yeah, that's a challenge. As having a 13-year-old and a 13-year-old male child, it is, you know, I want to leave these things to his dad to talk to him about, right? And we're in a good place, and we have a good communication stuff, like relationship, so that's not an issue. I still feel this responsibility, right, to talk to him about these things, but I have no idea. I don't know how to approach the subject. I have like no idea. Andrea, can you chime in on that? Like, how, I know that your expertise is in law and specifically police brutality. Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you advise mothers of teenage Black children, right? Like, how do we talk to our children about what's going on in the news? How do we talk to our children about how to deal with confrontation from these, what the media is called the Karens, this phenomenon of like micro policing?
I think a few things. One, I can't imagine, I'm not a mom, and I want to just acknowledge, I really can't imagine how to tell a Black child that the law really doesn't protect them, and that anytime they step out of the house, they could be killed. They could be beaten. They could be sexually assaulted or raped by the people who are named as their protectors. And I wouldn't, I mean, obviously 3.5 is young, but I wouldn't say, you know, it starts at, and also that people could be, that the police could be weaponized against them by white people who are displeased by something that they're doing. And, you know, one story that comes to mind when we think about the incident in Central Park is, you know, the permit patty incident, which happened in San Francisco, where a white woman called the police on an 8-year-old girl who was selling water outside her own house on the street, because she was annoyed by the sound that her, you know, offering the water for sale. And so I don't know how you explain to a Black child, you know, white ladies might call the police and get you killed, or your mere presence somewhere might get you killed. My heart breaks for moms who have to do that. And, you know, at the In Our Names Network, which is a national network of organizations working to end police violence against Black women, girls, trans, and gender nonconforming people, many of our members are moms or siblings of people who have been killed by police, or moms of people who are their daughters and sons and gender nonconforming children who they're concerned about and fighting for. So they're leading the resistance against police violence, and also having to have those conversations at the same time. And so I think the way I would start, just based on having worked with young people, is they're already talking about it. They already know, as Dani was saying. And so to ask them what they know and what they think and how they're feeling, and to not leave it to men to have the talk with young men and leave young women out of it either. Because young women, you know, like myself, we're told, you know, if you're being harassed by, you know, anyone, or you feel sexually threatened by anyone, go to the cops. Well, when I did that, the cops sexually harassed me and sexually assaulted me. And so we need to say to young girls, this is not the place to go, and to also be careful about their interactions with white folks in the world. And I think the last thing I'll say is that I do train people on the law. People need to be armed with the law, but I also train them that the best way to resist police violence is to survive the encounter. And so, and that actually that might feel different than what your body is telling you resistance looks like in the moment. And so to give folks tools to do that, and then to fight like hell afterwards. And I wanna really lift up what's happening in Minneapolis and LA right now as an uprising, as a demand for our dignity, a demand for our lives, and not a riot. It's really how we express, it's how we're expressing not only our dignity and our demands for our lives, but also our recognition of what gets protected and prioritized, right? That George Floyd died because of a claim of theft or forgery, right? Or some allegation that there was something involving property. He died over property. And right. So the fact that people are targeting property and stores that call cops on Black people all the time and place their lives at risk all the time over property, over often necessities, makes total sense to me as a target for an uprising. It's a strategic target for an uprising. And I do want to say that the people who are charged with the kinds of things that George Floyd were charged with are often Black women, that the top 5 charges around the country for Black women, and including Black moms, are theft, shoplifting, taking stuff you need. Half the people who need diapers can't afford to pay for them. And so, and diapers are not a thing that, again, I'm not a mom, but in my experience, diapers are not optional. And so, you're going to take what you need, or food for your kid is not optional, or things that you need in order to keep your kid clothed and safe are not optional. And so we need to start addressing that police interaction, which people tend to normalize. People are like, oh, no one should be arrested for drugs or for being homeless or for, you know, these kinds of things. But no one's saying no one should be arrested for theft, right? In fact, that's where all this sort of conversation is happening now about alleged theft in Minneapolis. And the fact is that if we care about Black moms, and we care about the criminalization of Black moms, and we care about Black moms who are fighting for their families, then we need to come up with a different response to people taking things they need than police. And we need to recognize all the moms out there who are having to have the conversations you're talking about both white people on the street and about police, and the ways in which, in fighting for the people in their lives, they're also subjected to police violence in many different ways. And one of the things I saw in the last few days was an arrest of a young man named Ty Anderson in Midland, Texas, which is a horrifying military, terribly unnecessary, terrifying, thankfully he lived, encounter with police, and seeing his grandmother, who was 90 years old, whose house this was happening in front of, come out and come and stand next to her grandson between the cops, assuming that being a 90-year-old Black woman would de-escalate the situation, would protect her grandson, and having the cops just shove her, throw her to the ground. And there's so many stories of moms and grandmothers and people, women in the community who are moms, pregnant people who are trying to protect members of their communities, experiencing police violence in those moments. I just really want us to think of ways to be with all those moms, to be with Diamond Phillips, who had to explain to her 3.5-year-old or 4-year-old child the killing of her partner in a car in front of her, and then have her child in Minneapolis try to console her mom after that incident. We have to recognize that Black moms in this moment are experiencing this in so many of the ways that you're like, how do we even talk about it? And then how do we intervene? And how do we recognize that they're leading uprisings and resistance? And so we're so proud to have so many Black moms who are part of our network. Kat Brooks from the Anti-Police Terror Project, and moms of folks who were killed in other spots. So we're just really super grateful for the resistance of moms against police violence everywhere all the time, and for raising the next generation of freedom fighters who are out in these streets every day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And thank you. I am getting questions in through the link. I'm going to get to them. I'm going to address them. Thank you so much for them, and continue to ask those questions. I want to pose this to both of you. It's not necessarily a question, but police violence isn't anything new. No one should be surprised because police came from slave patrols. And people need to stop acting like this is something new. So this is not an uncommon stance. When we bring these issues to light, like when we are saying this is, this is messed up, this is not right, this is wrong, then there's always that view that this isn't anything new. Why are we acting like this is something new? I want to know how you two would address like this thought process or this sentiment. And I'll reserve that question for after you are. How do we address these?
I think that the notion that it's not something new, I mean, part of what I do in Invisible No More, which is a book that I wrote about police violence against Black and Brown and Indigenous women and trans people, traces a very long history back to slave patrols, back to the first colonists landing on Turtle Island, of police violence against everyone, and particularly against women, queer and trans people in their communities. And each new life is a new life taken, and each person's life is valuable. And each, I mean, we were sitting here preparing, and I was like, I can't keep track. A Black trans man was killed in Tallahassee, Tony McDade. A Black woman was killed in Toronto, and it's under suspicion of police involvement recently. Regis Korshinsky-Paquette, Breonna Taylor, we're still mourning her death. We're still mourning the deaths of so many folks who were killed by police. And each time a life is taken that is our lives, our communities, and we see ourselves in those people, and we see ourselves in their mothers and in their communities and their families. And so it's important to have the context and to look at the causes and the things that keep bringing us into contact with killer police, whether it's shoplifting laws, drug laws, no-knock warrants, broken windows policing, policing of motherhood, policing of child welfare, policing of pregnancy, and keep looking at those things and getting at the root causes and the context. But we also are completely entitled to turn up every time one of us is taken, because they are our beloveds, they are our communities, even if we never met them.
I had to calm down. I got hype real quick.
Sorry, I'm organizing.
And the one thing I would just add to that is we might know that the history that connects the contemporaries, you know, policing to slave patrols, but not everyone knows that, right? And so we have to keep telling these stories. We have to keep helping others along the path. I'm just thinking about, you know, I very rarely take time to like get into it with people on social media for a number of reasons. But today I had this really beautiful exchange with someone who's connected to my cousin, who's she's not an organizer, she's not an activist, she's my cousin. And my cousin had posted something like, why do we always tear up our neighborhoods? Like, let's take it to their neighborhoods and turn up there. And I got into this really beautiful conversation with someone who was, you know, really aligned with that point of view and wasn't aware, you know, wasn't thinking about first, like questions of ownership and property that Andrea has already raised, but also that uprisings are one kind of immediate expression of rage and pain that's happening alongside strategic efforts that are continual, right? That it's not, that often we're the ones who are sitting home watching whatever's on the evening news, or we're like looking and seeing what CNN is showing. And we also need to be reminded that that's just one expression, that's just one response that's happening to this tragedy. That there are also organizations working through a Black feminist lens, or working, you know, that there are a number of different ways that people can plug in. And so, yeah, I feel where that question is coming from. And I think we take every opportunity we can to remind each other of not just the roots of these outrageous moments, but also the legacy of resistance and what's happening currently, that, you know, ways that people can plug in.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to add to that, one thing is that part of the resistance is building responses to things, whether it's poverty or domestic violence or violence in general that don't involve the police, right? That's a huge form of resistance that's going to prevent these kinds of interactions. And that is definitely work that moms are doing every day.
Right. I hear that type of question, and I wonder, like, what then should happen? Like, should we just accept it, like, because it's not something new? Or are we saying that, is this thought saying that we should accept it, we should move on, we should like expect it? And then my question to that is, okay, so if we stop acting like it's new, what then is your suggestion that we do? And also the fact that it is still happening, given this long history, given its long, you know, its legacy and its longevity, I don't necessarily think that we're acting like it's something new, but maybe enraged that it is still very much alive and thriving, right? One of the questions that came from the audience is, and you just touched on it briefly, Dani, but what is the impact of seeing these videos and pictures of murders like over and over again?
You know, personally, I don't watch them anymore. The last video I saw of a Black person being killed, I think, was Eric Garner. I definitely remember watching Oscar Grant be shot in his back on the subway platform in Oakland. To me, it doesn't, it's not motivating. It's not, the rage and the disgust and the desire for change is already there. I personally have drawn a line for myself. I think a lot of us are suffering. I think a lot of people are suffering. I kept seeing people saying that the video of Ahmaud Arbery being killed was like auto loading in their Twitter feeds. So I had days where I was like, I'm not going on Twitter because I don't even want to happen upon it. I don't even want to accidentally see it. So I think a lot of people are suffering. And I think what's very hard is that we know that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, for example, the police had the footage of Ahmaud Arbery being killed, right? So what's difficult is that it is the release and the widespread dissemination of the video that actually forces some kind of like prosecution or charges even being brought. So we see the value of it, unfortunately, but the actual emotional and psychic impact that it has on us is very difficult. And I saw somebody in the chat talking about like having to kind of figure out how to process their own emotions, like in thinking about how to deal with their children, right? Because it's, you know, say you see footage of someone being executed and then you have to go make dinner and you're crying. I mean, I've had, you know, many of us have had this happen. You're like crying while you're trying to get through bath time or whatever. And then that it's hard to say like, I'm going to just, I don't want to raise this with my child right now. What many of us can't lie to our kids. So when your kid says, what's wrong? It's going to come up that you say, you know, well, I just saw this, and so I think that's one of the things that's called for in this moment is we have to really know how to take care of ourselves and each other. I think there's a lot of people turning off, you know, logging off when they need to, and I think that's good. One other thing I'll say is, you know, I interviewed Monifa Bandele for the book that I wrote about Black motherhood. And I had this, Monifa is a parent of teenagers. I don't know if her children are still teenagers, but when I interviewed her a couple years ago, her girls were teenagers. And she was
all off to HBCUs.
Right, I know. Are they both off to HBCUs now?
Spelman and Howard.
Okay, there you go. So, but when I interviewed Monifa, her children were in high school, and she was talking about how, you know, she was like, when Rodney King was killed, we had to wait to get home at the end of the day to see it on the evening news. But now my children can just watch these murders over and over and over again, and thinking about what the impact of that is on their hearts and their minds. And so how this new piece of parenting becomes staging interventions with these handheld media, you know, with these devices, like, while you go to sleep, I'm actually going to hold on to your phone. Because not only might you watch it, but you and your friends, understandably so, are like processing this together, you know, and there might be some of it that's helpful, and there might be some of it that's re-traumatizing. And so she really opened my eyes to this new piece of parenting in our digital age that's around trying to mitigate some of the mental health effects of that are related to our young people's access to digital media.
Yeah. I think Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, they just had to pay out a huge settlement to people in their tech, like the tech department, for PTSD, because it was their job to watch these videos and screen them as, you know, do we put the you have to click the link, this is, you know, damaging material, this is graphic material, but there's actually a person who's sitting there in the office and their job is to watch these videos all day. And so,
but also the teens are taking these videos, right? The assault at Spring Valley High was videotaped by another teen in the classroom, Nia Kenny, right, who was then arrested. And it was a teenager who filmed George Floyd's death and who is currently living with the trauma of having filmed this, you know. So I think that, you know, and again, you know, Diamond Phillips had to film her own partner bleeding out in front of her right. face and her kid's face in this incident. And so I think we need to recognize that there's a question of protection from what's available online, but there's also a creating a culture of cop watch among young people to be there for each other and also help maybe de-escalate or reduce some of these incidents. But then we have to care for them as cop watchers because we have to understand the trauma of that. So I'm telling you, I'm grateful to Black moms every single day, every minute of every day for the work you all do.
Another question related to a prior question with regard like to exposure, right? How do you balance or how do you weigh the importance of visibility and this awareness building to police violence with these very real concerns about vicarious trauma and mental health for the children? Like, how do you make that judgment call? Or Danny, I guess what do you use? What would you use to make that judgment call?
Well, in terms of protecting your child, in terms of being kind of
like, how do you weigh the importance of the necessity for this visibility and for them to know that this is happening out here against their mental health, like the protection of their mental well-being?
I mean, I think so I can't speak to this experientially because again, my child is very young, but I think a lot of this has to do with knowing your child, right? And having open lines of communication, being able to sense into where they are and what they have capacity for. Because like Andrea said, our children know, right? So you want to meet them where they are and what they have capacity for. So, you know, it's like, you can tell when there's a look on your child's face that's like, I'm overwhelmed, right? And then you ease back a little bit. And I'm talking now about conversation that you have with your child, but it could also be like, you look overwhelmed, let me hold on to your phone for a little while, right? So I think some of it is about being in sync. And so that means that's the groundwork that we do all the time, not just when we're in crisis, right? That means that lines of communication are open always. We know, we can feel where our child is emotionally. We know how to meet them, that kind of thing. So then when these crisis moments hit, we know how to walk shoulder to shoulder with them and support them. But I'm also thinking about what Andrea just said about like creating support for young people who are cop watching, but for all young people, right? And so I think that this is where it's important that we plug our children into community as well. Right now, that's been what's getting me through this moment. I mean, even aside from these recent, the recent visibility around all this state violence and vigilante violence, prior to that, the chaos around COVID, I have leaned very heavily into community and friendships that, you know, over the years might like have been more social at some point, but we are also comrades and like politically aligned. And in these moments of chaos, we are leaning on each other as sources of support, as, you know, depending on each other for communication or information that we can trust and that kind of thing. And I think that making sure that our children are growing up with those same circles of support is also very helpful, to the extent that we can curate friends, you know, make sure that they are around the right peer groups who are going to have their backs, who they're going to have fun with, but also who they can make meaning with, who they can go to when they are scared or when they're like, yeah, when they're scared, you know, not friends who are going to run away from them when when the police show up, or disappear when they're in moments where they really need to have each other's backs. So I think that's important. And that's something, you know, I wrote a whole chapter on that, like this question of belonging, because how do you do that? How do you curate friendship groups for your kids that you're going to feel comfortable when it's 9 o'clock on a Saturday night and they say, I'm going out with so-and-so, that you're going to be able to rest easy and not be terrified the whole time that they're out with them. And a lot of that, so that is connected to like, where are you choosing to send your child to school? Mm-hmm. What kind of after school or youth development or, you know, political education environments are you putting them in? Because those are going to be the pools from which they pull their friends. So I think that's part of it, is not sheltering them from the information, and knowing that in addition to you and the other adults in their lives, they're going to have peers who they can lean on when they need support.
Andrea, you agree with that?
Every word of it.
Every word of it, yes. I got another question. You ready for another question? I'm excited about these questions, right? Where are Black caucus people whose districts are 50 to 80% Black? Where are the John Lewis, James Clyburn, who said, we know Joe Biden, AKA Jim Crow Biden, who promoted the 90s crimes bill and still lying about it? Status quo Black leaders have been cowardly silent on this issue since the 80s and 90s. Do you have any, how do you feel about that?
Not all, I mean, yes, absolutely. I can't tell you the number of times I've been, you know, just in a meeting with someone just kind of being like, aren't you a Black mom? Don't you, why are we having this conversation right now? But I also want to lift up the folks who are doing the work. So for instance, there is oh my goodness, this is middle age. This is terrible. Somebody help me. There is a Black alderperson or council member in Minneapolis, who was a member of the In Our Names Network, who was at our founding meeting at the Allied Media Conference, whose name is Andrea, and her last name I'm forgetting, even though she was the first political candidate I ever gave money to ever in life, for her council member campaign. She's a Black trans woman, and she spoke up today talking about that there is a public health crisis of racism in this country that's 400 years old, of anti-Black racism that City Council in Minneapolis needs to confront. And so thank you, Andrea Jenkins. Hallelujah. My gosh, is it going to get worse as I get older? But yes, so I'm grateful for Black leaders like Andrea Jenkins, who, is speaking truth to power every day. I'm grateful for Black leaders in New York City who are speaking truth to power every day. Inez Barron, Charles Barron were on City Council hearing last week talking about, police involvement in enforcement of social distancing orders that led to the violent arrest of a Black mom on a Brooklyn subway in front of her 5-year-old kid. And again, like how another question of like what moms are doing to explain to their children when they're experiencing police violence. And I've talked to moms who have talked about being sexually harassed by cops when they're walking their kids to and from school and saying, I don't know how to explain to my kid what the officer is trying to do right now, and why I have to kind of act in a way that's going to get us to your school safely, and why am I letting him disrespect me that way when I don't let anybody else disrespect me that way? Like that's a complicated conversation to have with a 5-year-old daughter, or an 8-year-old son who's ready to fight about how his mom is being disrespected right now. And so folks are speaking out about that in New York City, about that arrest, about also what happens to kids when moms are arrested, and how to explain to your kid the trauma of that. I mean, when you saw that video, she was led upstairs. The kid was left behind with a cop who had been not protecting the child in any way from seeing what was happening, but also was touching the child in a way that could have transmitted the virus. Like there was just so much about that interaction that was dangerous for all the kids and moms involved. And, there are Black council members who speak up. So I think the key that we've all learned, over the past 10 years or 20 years or 500 years is that representation is not everything, right? Not all Black women are for Black women. Some Black women lock up other Black women, and make a career out of it. And those, so we need to think about like Black leaders or represent people like Andrea Jenkins who are going to represent us in the ways that are about really standing up for us in our communities, and for moms and caretakers everywhere. And I just want to lift up, we're talking about Black mothers. For me, I take the position that National Bailout Organization takes in the Black Mamas Bailout, that when we're talking about mamas, we're talking about other mothers that Dani talks about in her book, and the culture of Black mothering that involves many of us, including those of us who have not given birth, and includes mothering in queer and trans communities, often by older Black trans women like Andrea Jenkins, who are mothering a whole host of folks in addition to being a parent herself. So just really want to lift up how we need to be supporting those folks who are doing that in roles where they have policymaking decisions, and calling into question those folks who are doing that in roles where they're not standing up for Black folks.
Absolutely. So I'm going to bring.
I just want to say just one thing in response to that question. I mean, I think the thing that stood out to me from the question was like, maybe I'm just hearing what I want to hear, but like, how did we end up with Biden as a Democratic nominee? Which I just want to like sit with that, because of all the things that are perplexing in this moment, it's like, wow, here we are. And I don't have an answer. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say about that. But it is making me, it's something else that is making me just like lean so heavily into communities where I feel like I can be affirmed and I can make sense of this moment with people, wrap my mind around what's going on. And so like Andrea just talked about connecting with Andrea Jenkins at AMC. I can't wait to get myself to AMC, y'all. Like, I can't wait to get myself to AMC. I know that it's going to be virtual. It's going to be something different from what we had in the previous 20 years. And I trust that that magic's going to be there. I can't wait to get myself to Black Love Convergence. I'm doing the movement generation, online course correction, transition in the age of COVID-19. Like, I am so hungry for spaces where I can escape from the crazy making nature of this moment. That may not have been the best word choice, but the like, this moment is so disorienting, and I am so hungry for places where I feel like I can find a way forward. Representation is not everything. Electoral politics is not everything. And so this is a moment where, at least on the kind of national playing ground, I feel very lost in terms of where we are in electoral politics. And so I'm turning as frequently as possible to spaces where I can try to make sense of this world with other people. And some of that is happening through reporting and storytelling, which is my job and what I do. And to be honest, a lot of it is just about study. Like, I'm just trying to understand. And some of that is going to end up in a story, and some of it is so that I can orient myself in a way just to walk another step to make it into the next day without feeling like I've completely lost my way.
Thank you, Dani. And I want to bring this back, starting with you, Dani. One of the comments was like, so to bring it back to, like, to come back to a political lens, like, how do mothers get political? How do we get political? And I'm going to, like, stagger onto that, and this is for the participants, the people in the room. Like, what are things, what are action items, what are, like, doable things that can happen that you think are necessary to uplift mothers? Not to diminish any mother's loss, yes. What happens when the mother is watching her 7-year-old, I think it was, her 7-year-old son be accused of sexual assault in a mall by a woman? And I was so pleased with him that he was like, no, I don't accept your apology. But my question is, like, what are the action items? What are we doing? What can we do? What are the ideas that we're having for supporting mothers? Like, what are we thinking about? Andrea, audience, Dani?
I mean, so many things. I want Dani to talk about the article she wrote about supporting mothers in the time of COVID. And I think supporting mothers both in their grieving, resisting police violence, and organizing around police violence, and making sure that when we tell stories, we don't just tell the stories we're used to hearing and telling of men who are not imagined to be trans or not imagined to be queer, but that we tell the stories of mothers who are experienced, like the grandmother who was taken down trying to protect the person we're all talking about, Ty Anderson, right? And we should be talking about both of them. So I think that's one way to support mothers. I think another way is to recognize how mothers are being impacted in this particular moment. And, mothers are essential workers. Mothers are healthcare workers. Mothers are also essential workers in grocery stores and service industries and other places that aren't being lifted up and celebrated in the same way, but who are facing the same questions every day about, should I go to work and put my kids at risk, or should I stay home and starve and then maybe have to shoplift, and then now we're all at risk by the police? Like, how, because I'm not getting, or I'm working in an informal economy as a hair braider or or trading sex or doing something else, and I'm not getting a stimulus check, and that's also requiring me to go out into the world in ways that are not necessarily safe. It's hard to be in the sex trade and stay home depending on what branch of the trade you're in. And so it's really about figuring out how to support Black mothers who are doing everything that they can in this moment to keep their families going, and the ways that they're trying to stay safe, and offering childcare and respite, not just to healthcare worker moms, but to all moms in this moment, frankly, particularly single moms. And then also recognizing the conditions for folks who are in prison right now. We're all fighting to get everyone out of prison that we can in this moment, because prisons are such a public health risk right now. And here in New York, we're fighting to get pregnant people out of prison. And it's really an incredibly arduous fight. Cuomo said he would let pregnant people out, and yet pregnant people are not coming out, and they're describing horrifying conditions inside. There's an article in The Cut from someone who was in Bedford, 7 months pregnant, describing her experience. Horrifying. And obviously we know, and thank you, Kay McCoy, for raising the story of Andrea Circlebear, who died of COVID-19 in prison after giving birth. And just her sister's Sarah Lee Circlebear's story is told in Invisible No More. She died in police custody by people who didn't care about her health, her pain, who didn't believe she was in pain, who were refusing her medical attention. And here's her sister dying in prison giving birth. Again, people didn't care about her pain, didn't care about her medical condition as an Indigenous person who was incarcerated for a minor offense. So and people shouldn't be incarcerated, period. So I think we just need to be fighting for moms wherever they are in this moment, including moms in cages in this moment, or who are worried about their children in cages, who are literally, talk about not also being able to imagine what it's like to be a mom, knowing that your loved one, your child, is locked in a cage they can't get out of, they can't social distance, they have no sanitizer, they have no mask, and the guards are coming in every day refusing to wear masks and infecting them, and you literally can't get out. I don't know what it's like to be a mom who can't get information in that situation, or a mom who's incarcerated and can't find out what's happening with their kids in that situation. So decarcerate is a way to support moms in this moment, support moms resisting police violence, and support moms who are essential workers with a real people's bailout that is centering the needs of Black moms, particularly, who are and Indigenous, who along with Indigenous moms are the lowest income people in this country and experiencing the highest rates of poverty. And I just want to notice that we're putting a lot of money now into public health interventions like contact tracing and hiring up people to do that. And I don't know about y'all, but my mom was the best contact tracer. She knew where I was, even when I was being very good of concealing it. And even up until, she recently joined the Ancestors, but she was contact tracing me at, in her 90s, being like, where did you go today? What did you do? How are you feeling? And what do you need? Every time I talked to her. And so let's pay moms to do what they're already doing, which is momming. And taking care of their communities and taking care of their loved ones. Let's pay them to call everyone in their phone, and pay grandmothers to call everyone in their phone, or be out on the stoop and caring for folks and reminding them to wear masks and saying this is not an order from a murderous state that you shouldn't trust with your life or any advice at all. This is a request from your grandmother because I love you and I want you to love me and take care of me. That's what we need to be funding right now, as opposed to creating other infrastructures to police Black people and bodies and health that aren't, they're not calling saying, what do you need? They're calling to say, you've been tested positive, now you have to stay inside, and who have you been in contact with? Because we're gonna make them stay inside. And none of that is the caretaking that Black moms do, and moms of all, communities of color do, that we need to be supporting them to do right now. So a few thoughts, but I know Dani has lots of
taking all the notes.
I love that frame of let's not extend the surveillance, systems of surveillance. Let's tap into moms and families for contact tracing. That's brilliant. I think that goes to one of the first points I would make, which is I think the initial question was how do Black moms get political? We're already political, we've been political. That's all we do is politics, right? And the one of the ways that's because politics is about power. So we're always analyzing power, figuring out how to protect our children from illegitimate power. We're always, have our eyes out to see, we're watching, we're making sense of things. The thing that's been on my mind a lot these days, and Andrea mentioned a piece that I wrote for The Nation that was about being an unpartnered parent in this moment, and the fact that there was no public health guidance around what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to get support, because all the health guidance is go in your house and shut the door and don't come out. Well, if you don't have another adult in your home and you have to work, how does that, right? So, and so for the story, I called epidemiologists and different public health experts, as well as just parents, Black parents, to see how they're managing. And I learned a lot, and I'll post a link to the story in the article. I'm sorry, in the chat, in case it's useful to anybody. But what that has gotten me thinking about was in this moment of chaos where there's no coherent, consistent public health guidance coming from the federal government. And we have to piece it together. Like, maybe you live in a state with a governor who's taking this seriously and is like being informed by public health experts. Like, maybe you can trust what you're hearing from your state government or your local government. Maybe not. Maybe you're like, you have to read, you know, a million different news outlets and medical journals to try to make sense of what's going to keep your family safe. But I have talked to so many parents, primarily mothers in this moment, who a huge part of what they're doing is trying to understand how to keep their families safe. And often this is in families where there's like huge distrust of media for good reason, right? It's not like we can always trust what corporate media is telling us. So a lot of us are holding like, I do believe that this pathogen is dangerous. I do believe that, you know, we need to social distance, we need to wear masks, we need to do these things. But I'm one voice in a family where other people are saying, this is about big pharma moving toward making us all get vaccinations. You know, these competing narratives, some of which are like justified. Like, you can understand where people have these ideas, where these ideas are coming from. But I think that has been not frequently identified as political work that a lot of mothers are holding in this moment. The stakes are very high. And a lot of us are combating disinformation in our communities and in our homes, and trying to weave together rules for our families that can keep us healthy and safe, despite the current chaos where it's like, you don't know where to turn. So there's that. What can we do to support Black mothers? There are so many things. I mean, this is basic, but I've just started giving a lot more money, you know. I haven't lost all my work yet. I say yet, because
Yeah,
this is a mess, right? But I haven't. I still have income, and so I'm increasing my giving. And some of that is informal, like, hey, I know this person who's really struggling. Yep, let me know, Venmo you, and you get it to them or whatever. Some of it is through more formal means. So I haven't donated to this place yet, but I've been reading a lot about this new birth center fund. So many of you might know that because it was really hard to give birth in hospitals and people were limiting, like, you can't have a partner with you, you can't have anybody with you when you give birth. Many people were saying, I can't give birth in this hospital. I got to figure out a way to do a home birth or something. Is there a birth center in my community? And Leslie Welch of Birth Detroit, and then somebody else who is trying to put a birth center together, or is forming a birth center in the Boston area, I believe, started a fund to help increase access to birth centers, to out-of-hospital births for low income. I'm not sure actually they're framing if it's low income people of color or what, but basically acknowledging that not everybody has equal access to like home births and birth centers, right? And so they started this birth fund because COVID has presented this moment where even more people are turning to out-of-hospital births. So there are so many ways to support us, to support families, to support Black people, support Black mothers. Let's see if there's one other point I wanted to make. You know, just one other thing I would say is like, you know, I'm a Black mom. How am I trying to support myself? I'm really trying to not squander this moment. That is what I keep turning to, is like, this is a very difficult moment for many reasons, but like the economy just shut down for weeks. Capitalism was on the ropes for real. It still is. And like the plane stopped basically. I mean, not fully, but like everything that has come to define contemporary life ground to a halt. And that's a moment for us to really think about whether we want to get back to normal. And even if we personally make decisions to not return to normal, like to what degree can we scale those things? So maybe it's not just our family, but maybe maybe we're getting together with a couple of other families and trying to figure out how to divest from certain systems that don't serve us. So I think that's another way to think about how we can support ourselves and each other, is like, before they all kick us out of our doors and say like, go spend your money, go make your money, which is what they're doing right now. The virus is still there. The hospitals might be able to help us if we get sick, but like nothing has changed, right? What's changed is that they're trying to make their money, right? So while we still have this little bit of an opening, I'm really trying to make use of it. And some of that is about just getting really quiet. And it's about that study that I was talking about. It's about reading, thinking, being in communication with people I trust. But I really don't want to squander this moment because it's a real opportunity to figure out what doesn't get let back into my life.
Wow, I'm going to tuck that into my own file cabinet of things to do to stay sane. We've got about 4 minutes left. And so I want to thank you, Andrea, so much. I want to thank you, Dani, so much for the conversation, your viewpoints, your suggestions, your acknowledgments, your expertise. It's amazing. I feel like this could go on for another, maybe 30 or 45 minutes, but I think Zoom is going to shut us down at 5. So I want to say thank you for your time. I want to say thank you for your passion, and thank you so much for the good work that you are doing. You can find links to Andrea's books and Dani's books and their websites, more information about them and the organizations that they work for and support in the chat. There will be a closed caption available, transcript for this webinar tomorrow. And a couple of things before I cut out. Our next virtual love healing session is in 2 weeks, June 11th. And the topic will be Better Futures, Visioning a Time of Crisis. That will be a fiction writing workshop led by Walida Marisha. As we all know, and we are, we might not all know, but we're all very eager for it. The AMC, the Allied Media Conference, is just around the corner with new dates, which are July 23rd through 26th. To find out about the AMC, please go to amc.alliedmedia.org. What else? I want to leave you with this thought, or, something to think about. I'm not sure. There's this special on HBO, was on HBO, called Euphoria. And it was basically about these teenagers that were born in a crisis. It was 9/11, right, when the towers dropped. And so you see how these children that were born and raised in this time of like crisis and fear, like what their lives look like and what their coping mechanisms are. And so this thought to leave us, what do you think our children are going to grow? Our children of this era, like what are they going to grow up? What are their coping mechanisms going to be? What are their narratives going to be? And like, from there, what kind of things can we do to, like Dani said, curate the types of experiences that we want our kids to have? I thank you so much for tuning in, for joining us. I hope you show up in 2 weeks at the same time. If you have questions, if you have suggestions, if you have resources, if you have organizations and projects that are in the business of uplifting Black mothers, please share them. Please share them with our network at Allied Media Projects. We can get these things out to our panelists as well as mothers in Detroit and abroad. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Dani. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you all 47 of you who came. Thank you, Nandi Comer, Director of the Speakers Bureau. Thanks, John and IT, holding us together.
Thank you, Scheherazade, for leading us in a beautiful conversation. We're so grateful to you and all of your work.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scheherazade, Nandi, and AMP.
Bye.
I think we're supposed to be debriefing.
I think we're supposed to hang up, but I'm looking at the chat.
I know.
Also, live.
Also, I just really want us to go on.